Hello, folks. Back again with ancient cosmography. Let's see, just showing some of the underworld maps. Sorry, I got like something stuck on my phone. I have to clean up. All right, so I've discovered, like, I think this was the first one I discovered. Those things don't fucking work. Okay, there. And so yeah, I discovered this map of America. Like, it says on the map, this is the land across the Western Sea underneath the planet where the sun goes at night. So, if people don't understand this, the Western Hemisphere is underneath the Eastern Hemisphere. Like, if you're standing in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere is underneath your feet. And if you're standing in the Western Hemisphere, the Eastern Hemisphere is underneath your feet. Therefore, the fact they called it the underworld, they said it was under the planet and in the West. That's, modern people are not very well in touch with geography compared to the ancients, so they don't really realize that that the Eastern Hemisphere is that the Western Hemisphere is under the Eastern Hemisphere from the perspective of the Eastern Hemisphere. We're just used to looking at flat maps and thinking that down is south. Down is never south. It's never been south. That's just a way to read a map. So, in this map, west, it was red with east as down and west as up. But they also had maps with other orientations because they were not so psychologically addicted and delusionally believing in one particular orientation as if it had some, intrinsic meaning. Like, a lot of modern people really seem to think that north is up. Like, when I show them these maps and then they are like, up, down, you mean like south? Like, they really think that. They really think there's an inherent identity between south and down and north and up, whereas the ancients were not as delusional. So anyway, like, I discovered this like 5 years ago. Still have got zero credit for it. Nobody with any no university, no institution has recognized it, no museum, no, I've sent this stuff to hundreds of professors at many different universities in different countries. They never write back. There's only a couple different scholars who have actually corresponded with me, and sometimes they just say, like, well, I'm not a cartographer, so I can't comment. Really? Okay. It's pathetic. So yeah, like, modern people have zero pattern recognition on purpose. Because there's very few people that I've shown these to that really acknowledge what it is. So, this is obviously Central America here. And of course, it slopes down on the, on the west side and up on the east side. So that's, shown here. You have a bigger island on the east side with Cuba compared to on the west side. You just have Galapagos or whatever. It's a smaller island. And you have a big bay, Gulf or whatever in Mexico and Florida and whatever in Texas. And then you have a smaller Gulf for the St. Lawrence. That's what I'm guessing that is. So, you know, it clearly doesn't show beyond here. It's just showing this square of it. It doesn't show south of here. You know, this is not intended to be the full shape of it. Just this is the shape within this square. So yes, of course it expands further in all these directions. But for this map, it's just showing the square. So, you know, that's not, you know, it's not a facsimile, of course, but it should be enough to go on. It should be enough for people to realize, oh, the chances of them just guessing, they just guessed that across the Atlantic Ocean to the west, underneath the earth where the sun goes at night, there were two, you know, major land masses connected by a thin isthmus. You know, just those details without the rest of it. You have to literally be brain dead to think that. I mean, that's what I think. Like, I don't understand. Like, people are like, well, it could be, it could. No. It means you have zero pattern recognition. This is the people that fall for, you know, Fauci and everything. It's like, because they can't discern on their own. They can't recognize patterns and be like, oh, sometimes massive correlation does indicate causation, you know. So yeah, 5 years on, still no credit for this. I don't know if the Western world will ever credit this. I might just leave the Western world and just like live with, you know, hunter-gatherers, because they seem to be the only honest people. Or maybe just the only people intelligent enough to like recognize patterns, because vast majority of people around here cannot. They'll just look at it and be like, well, maybe. That's the best they can do. Fucking, you know. Whereas if it was on TV, they'd be like, oh yeah, I can see that. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I just think most people are liars. Most people's personality is not honest in general in the modernized West. So, you know, this shows a later map that I found from 4,000, or I mean, it's an earlier map, but I found it later, I think. So this one's from about 3,000 years ago, from the most famous Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani in the British Museum. And this was a later map from, or earlier map from 4,000 years ago, from the Book of Two Ways. And this is the most famous Book of Two Ways from the coffin of Sepi. And, you know, just as the Aborigines painted maps on their coffins, the Egyptians did too. And so, you know, it just becomes like, this is the original, of course. This is the reconstruction. Reconstruction kind of fucks up Greenland, of course. It changes the colors of a few things, but I included it primarily for Baja and Newfoundland, because these two are very invisible here because they're both white. You know, Newfoundland is like this white rabbit, and Baja is like this white horned animal. And Baja is very white. It's like, I'm not sure why, if it's like salt or like somehow like a lot of the deserts there are just like pure white. So it makes sense that it was depicted that way. But, you know, just based on like the foremost scholar on this, who's done the most recent up-to-date research, Wael Sherbini, who's an Egyptian Egyptologist in Europe, Belgium, I think. And, he says that these two lines, the blue line and the black line, represent coastlines. He says that this line represents the east coast of this underworld. He says this line represents the west coast. So he has everything correct. He just doesn't believe that it's an actual place. He's like, no, just by chance they guessed that there was a land across the sea with all these characteristics. So, based on that, he deduces that from translating all the hieroglyphs. He's done the most recent translation. But the idea that, so he's saying, okay, this is the west coast, this is the east coast. And on the west coast, it has this guy here and this guy here, and those are the only things sticking out. And of course, on the actual land across the Western Sea, under the world from Egypt, under the planet, there's just this peninsula here, the Alaskan Peninsula, and then the longer Baja Peninsula right here. So, and there's no other major peninsulas, and so we don't see any other major peninsulas painted on here. Then on the other side, we do see this major island here, Newfoundland. It's right there, shaped the same way, just flipped retrograde. And we clearly see the shapes for Cuba and Hispaniola. So the people who just really think like, oh, wow, what a coincidence. Okay, just never pose as an authority on science, because this is not just a coincidence. Like, you had to be so dumb to just think like, oh, of course, yeah, they were just good guessers. They guessed good. No. So dumb. I mean, and then in this one, they fucked up like Central America, so they don't have like a thin isthmus really. But these are other versions from the same graveyard from different coffins, and they fucked up other aspects. These are earlier ones. So they fucked up this part because they were basing it originally on a retrograde map, but they nailed more or less Central America isthmus right here, the thin part of all these maps. And they pretty much nailed Florida right there, at least in this one of, I forget whose map that is, whose coffin that's in. I think this one is Jehudi Nacht. And, and then it really shows, these ones really show the Hudson Bay much better than that Seppi's map does. Anyway, so just the fact that people can look at all this and just be like, wow, what a coincidence. It just shows like that this is why I was not at all surprised people lining up to do whatever Fauci told them to do. And I won't be surprised if they continue doing that forever until they boost out or whatever. Because I already knew through science, through trying to do science, how people think in the modern world, the modernized, industrialized world, as opposed to like the common sense people and intelligent people in like Papua or among the Aborigines or in Africa. So yeah, here, this is the 5,500-year-old map from Tomb 100. Can see clearly the shape of Greenland up here. Can see clearly the shape of how Florida used to be when the sea level was lower and the coasts were much wider, and the Florida Keys were part of the mainland, etc. You can see the Yucatan when it was bigger, and Baja California when it was probably a bit wider. Hudson Bay right there, the Isthmus of Panama, South America. So, like the idea that this would just happen to be, that all these maps that are all basically labeled, I mean, this one is pre-hieroglyphs, but it's still, I'm sure lots of Egyptologists can recognize that it's the same concept as the later underworld maps. And the idea that just all these maps happen to actually match what is under the world from them, under the planet, by chance is not a rational adult supposition. This is the same thing, just without I didn't change the color to expand the coastlines for those, so you see the modern coastlines more. And it also shows the islands and stuff, but they're much more stylized in this map. 420, nice. So, this is just another one showing that one, and that one also shows Antarctica here. So here, Antarctica. I mean, this map is kind of like a weird angle, so it has it kind of pointing this way, but it's a bit arbitrary, and this one's put more space between them for some reason and kind of shrunk America down, I think partly to fit all these other little islands and things they're putting around there.